So let's just break them down real quick. All right. The first thing I pointed out in our newsletter recently was the need for time to think. And this was the number that really got me when I was looking at the data. Recent Gallup polls show that less than a fifth of leaders reported that they had sufficient time to fulfill their responsibilities with, quote, the depth and diligence required. The depth and diligence required. In other words, they were going and they were doing the best they could, but they felt as if they did not have the time necessary to really think. And there have been countless studies that show that increasingly we are not setting aside the appropriate time to connect the dots, dig in, and obviously identify the insights in all this data that we are inundated with. And to be honest, that's happening to our agents as well. Our agents are increasingly deluged in data, not just in terms of news and in terms of MLS updates, but their own performance stats, which they haven't had insights into before, competitor performance stats, and of course, just generally market stats. And this increase in data is helpful only if you have time to synthesize. So the first thing we want to think about as leaders is making sure we actually institutionalize time to think for our people. And we have that time, believe it or not. I think we have excessive amounts of this time. It's about repurposing it. And I want you to consider repurposing your office meetings, maybe not all of them, but maybe one a month, for a very different purpose than simply adding more to information overload. So when you were looking at your office meetings, if you were to evaluate what you normally talk about, it's more information. It's just another log on the fire of updates, memos, new listings that might be coming on, changes in the market, updates to interest rates, consumer trends, competitor actions, etc. So it's important to share that information, except that our office meeting becomes just one more piling on of information overload. So what if we took one office meeting a month and we provided the tools? Maybe we taught our people how to do an analysis, SWOT analysis, gap analysis, statistical analysis. We provided some structure by giving them a couple of data points that are necessary to navigate the market, and then gave them the time to process, to synthesize, to develop insights from all of this data, and help our agents and even our staff connect the dots so that they can act, not just react. Now, a simple example of this was driven home to me in 2 workshops I did last week, in which a whole audience, 300 agents, were clear about what was happening in the marketplace. I asked them, look, are we in the seller's marketplace or a buyer's marketplace? And they rolled out all the stats that indicated they were squarely still in a seller's marketplace, and that was their market, and that's great. So they knew the stats. But then I said, well, describe to me what a day-to-day looks like to you. And they were describing a day-to-day schedule in which they were pursuing buyers. And they were doing lead generation for buyers, driving buyers around. They weren't doing seller market things like booking listing appointments, like getting referrals from their past buyers, like using their listings as an opportunity to prospect other listings. So there was a complete mental disconnect between the data that they had and what they should be doing. And it wasn't their fault. I'm not picking on them. What occurred to me was this is a perfect example of not having time to think. Wow, I've got data, but what does it mean? So the first thing I strongly recommend is that just like we as leaders need time to think about what's going on and then to adjust our strategy, we create times for our people to think as well.
Hello, I'm Matthew Ferrara. Thanks for visiting the Leadership Club, a special place for owners, managers, and executives to focus on their growth as leaders in their firms and the industry. You can join TLC as a free subscriber, and you'll get the weekly newsletter and explore a whole bunch of open posts, recordings, and downloads in our free section. And if you like what we're doing here and you're ready for some TLC, then consider upgrading your account to access the masterminds, the coaching calls, and our ongoing training. So if you're ready to take your leadership to the next level, then the Leadership Club is the place for you to do it. Thanks for stopping by, and I look forward to welcoming you to the club.